I've never been the trusting type. Maybe that's why I was drawn to law enforcement as a career. Though I eventually settled into a private security job in our quiet suburb just outside of Denver, Colorado, life rolled along predictably. Neighbors mowed their lawns at 6 p.m., families hosted barbecues on weekends, and the local diner knew your order by heart. My wife, Olivia, and I had been married for 10 years. On the surface, everything looked stable, some might even say enviable. But scratch that surface, and you'd find rot creeping underneath. I started noticing the changes about 6 months ago. They were small at first: a new perfume, a sudden interest in yoga classes, and a spiked curiosity in girls' nights out. None of these things was inherently damning, but taken together, they raised an eyebrow, at least for someone like me, who's paid to see patterns where others see none. Olivia had always been meticulous. She worked as a project manager for a local tech startup, but she started becoming sloppy about covering her tracks. There were dinners that ran too late, phone calls she quickly dismissed, and text messages she refused to let me catch a glimpse of. Our shared credit card bill showed purchases at restaurants we never visited together. I'd ask about them, and she'd just shrug, claiming they were group outings with her coworkers. But her expressions never quite matched her words. On Thursday nights, she started going to yoga. Her workout clothes were always ready, water bottle in hand. She'd leave around 7 p.m. and come back a few hours later, sweaty and claiming exhaustion, at least, that's what she told me. But then I noticed her yoga mat never looked used. There was no odor, no dampness from water bottles, no sweat stains on the clothes. It was like a prop in some cheap stage play. Around this time, my temper began to simmer. I've been called hot-headed, but I prefer direct. I don't sugarcoat, and I don't believe in second chances without good reason. If Olivia was cheating, I wanted the truth, and I wanted it before I destroyed our marriage with false accusations. So, I decided to collect evidence like I was on a stakeout, calm and methodical, letting the facts speak for themselves. But inside, the rage was building. Every night she came home late, every suspicious phone call chipped away at my composure. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. We had arguments, yes, but who doesn't? We had busy careers that sometimes pulled us in different directions. Maybe she just needed space, I told myself, these lies to keep from confronting the rising anger in my gut. I even tried cooking her favorite meals, surprising her with flowers once, in some desperate attempt to fix something I didn't fully understand. But the distance grew. Unspoken words filled the silence of our home. I started sleeping on the couch occasionally, telling her it was because of back pain, but it was really to avoid lying next to a woman who might be lying to me. The tension in the air was thick enough to slice with a knife. She barely looked me in the eye, darting out of the house before dawn, claiming urgent meetings. In the back of my mind, a plan was forming. I knew I had to confront this head-on, but first, I had to confirm my suspicions beyond any shadow of a doubt. The worst part was, I suspected the truth. My wife was cheating. What I didn't know yet was how far this betrayal went, who was involved, and just how ugly it would get once everything came to light. I knew better than to rush in without a plan. After all, I had 10 years of marriage at stake. But with every passing day, the tension strangled my composure. My job in private security taught me a few tricks about gathering information discreetly. So, one Thursday evening, I decided to track Olivia's movements. It was late October, the crisp night air biting at my lungs as I waited in my pickup truck down the street from our house. Olivia had told me earlier she'd be working late at the tech firm again. She left around 6:30 p.m., wearing that same set of yoga clothes she always used as an alibi. She even carried the same water bottle. I can't lie, my blood was already boiling, but I forced myself to stay calm, like a predator waiting for the right moment. I tailed her car carefully, keeping my distance so as not to spook her. She didn't head to the office downtown, nor did she turn toward the neighborhood yoga studio. Instead, she merged onto the interstate, heading south. For someone allegedly going to yoga, she sure took a roundabout route. After 20 minutes, she pulled into a parking lot behind a modest-looking motel called the Pinecrest Inn. It was the kind of place with dim lights and a flickering neon sign advertising vacancy. Maybe it seemed inconspicuous to her, but to me, it stood out like a scarlet letter. She parked her car near the rear entrance. I waited, my heart pounding like a war drum. When she got out, she wasn't alone for long. Another sedan pulled in, headlights off. A figure stepped out, a man in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, tall with an athletic build, wearing a baseball cap. He greeted her with a hug that lingered too long, and then they disappeared into the motel together. My stomach churned. This was the evidence I dreaded. It felt like my insides were being carved out with a dull knife. But I reminded myself I needed more than just a sighting. I needed proof that she couldn't talk her way out of. So, I waited, counting the minutes, my mind reeling with betrayal and fury. She emerged about 2 hours later, face flushed, hair disheveled. The man walked her to her car, gave her a kiss that left no doubt, and they parted ways. I followed him next, memorizing his license plate. He drove straight to an upscale neighborhood half an hour away. He parked in a driveway next to a nicely kept lawn, stepping inside a colonial-style house. A porch light illuminated the place just enough for me to see the name on the mailbox, Harrison. Now I had a name. Back in my truck, hands shaking, I ran a quick search on my phone. The owner of the house was a Daniel Harrison, married, apparently, to a woman named Sophia Harrison. The puzzle pieces were clicking into place. Olivia was having an affair with this Daniel, a married man. Knowing this didn't calm me, though. It fueled a rage unlike anything I'd felt before. They weren't only hurting me but also blindsiding his wife. Two families wrecked for the sake of their cheap thrills. I drove home in a daze, images of that motel, that embrace, seared into my brain. There was no escaping it. By the time I pulled into our driveway, Olivia was already inside, showered and pretending she'd had a mundane evening. As I entered, she gave me some half-baked story about traffic on the interstate and grabbing a late dinner. I stared at her, imagining how easy it would be to break something like the nearest glass, or even her illusions. But I held my tongue, for the moment at least. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with possibilities for how to handle this. Should I confront her? File for divorce? Blow up her world as spectacularly as she'd blown up mine? My sense of betrayal was like a living entity, gnawing at my insides. But a rational side of me insisted I plan this out carefully. I wanted to catch her so thoroughly that she couldn't lie, couldn't weasel her way out of what she'd done. Little did I know, I wasn't the only one on the trail. The next morning, I'd receive a phone call that would change everything, and it would come from someone with more at stake than me. My phone rang at exactly 9 a.m. the following morning. The number on the screen was unknown, local area code. Under normal circumstances, I might have let it go to voicemail, but my instincts told me to pick up. "Hello," I answered, keeping my voice guarded. "Is this Mr. Carter?" a woman asked. Her tone was measured, but there was an undercurrent of tension there. "Yes, it is," I replied. "Who's calling?" "This is Sophia Harrison," she said. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew who she was before she even introduced herself. "I got your number from an acquaintance who works with you at the security firm," she continued. I believe we should speak about our spouses." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I'd been so focused on my own anger that it hadn't occurred to me Daniel's wife might be onto them as well. "All right," I finally managed. "Let's talk." We agreed to meet at a coffee shop near my office, public enough to ensure a modicum of civility but not so crowded we couldn't talk openly. She arrived before me, sitting at a corner table with her hands clenched around a disposable cup. She was attractive in a composed, professional way. A wedding band still clung to her finger, but her face was drawn, eyes puffy from what had likely been a sleepless night. The moment I sat down, she leveled her gaze at me. "I know about Daniel and Olivia," she said quietly. "I'm guessing you do, too." My jaw tightened. "Yeah, I know. How long have you known?" She took a sip of her coffee, as though bracing herself. "A few weeks," I admitted. "I didn't have solid proof until last night. I hired a private investigator," she said. "Caught them on camera leaving that motel." Her eyes flickered with a pain I recognized all too well. Part of me admired her directness, no beating around the bush. Then again, she probably admired the same brutality in me. "What do you want?" I asked, leaning forward. She set her coffee cup down a bit too hard. "I want them to pay," she said. "I want them to feel what we feel. I want everyone to know what they've done. But more than that, I want to stop this before they decide to blow up our marriages and walk off into the sunset." I felt a snarl forming in my throat. "You think we can stop them?" She tilted her head, a calculating spark in her eyes. "I think we can catch them in such a way that they'll never be able to deny it," she said. "And we can do it in a manner that makes sure they regret every single second they spent lying to us." Inside, I was torn. Part of me wanted to confront Olivia privately, to explode in my own household and deal with it personally. But the bigger, more vindictive part of me wanted to humiliate her as thoroughly as she'd humiliated me. I'd always considered myself a man of strong moral fiber, but betrayal can twist anyone into a vengeful mind monster. "And how do you propose we do that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Sophia's lips curled into something like a smile, though there was no warmth there. "I know the next time they plan to meet," she said. "It's this upcoming Friday, same motel, around 8 o'clock in the evening. We can be there waiting, cameras, evidence. And once we have it, we confront them together, right on the spot." The mental image of Olivia's face when she realized she'd been caught in the act gave me a dark sense of satisfaction. But I also felt a twinge of unease. I wasn't a man who generally enlisted the help of outsiders in my personal affairs. Still, this was different. We were dealing with two adulterers who thought they could sneak around behind our backs indefinitely. If there was any chance to corner them, it would be now. I took a breath, shutting out any lingering doubt. "Fine," I said, my voice low and final. "Let's do it." Sophia nodded, her eyes glinting with shared rage. "Good," she said. "Meet me Thursday night. We'll go over final details." She pushed a slip of paper across the table with her number. "We're going to make them wish they never messed with us." We parted ways, each stepping into the crisp autumn air with the same simmering determination. I didn't know what the confrontation would look like exactly, but I knew one thing: it wouldn't be pretty. My wife had shattered my trust, and I intended to make sure she tasted every bit of the bitterness she'd served me the next few days passed in a haze of pent-up anger and strategic planning. Olivia maintained her usual routine of lies, heading out to yoga classes or late meetings, while I pretended to believe her. In the meantime, I met Sophia at a quiet park on Thursday evening, where we hashed out the final steps of our plan. She brought a small duffel bag with a discreet video camera, tripods, extra batteries, the works. I contributed some audio gear from my security connections, a directional microphone designed for capturing conversations through thin walls. Our objective was clear: gather irrefutable evidence, then confront them right in the middle of their little rendezvous. Friday arrived. By 7:30 p.m., I was parked 2 blocks away from the Pinecrest Inn, adrenaline spiking my heart rate to levels that reminded me of my old training days. Sophia pulled up in a separate car, wearing jeans and a dark jacket. The parking lot was half empty, typical for a place that catered to discreet affairs and short stays. We slipped around the back, scanning for Olivia's sedan and Daniel's sedan. Sophia spotted his first. "There," she whispered, nodding toward a silver sedan with partial plates that matched Daniel's. A wave of cold rage washed over her features. Minutes later, Olivia's car arrived, headlights off. She parked near the staircase that led to the motel's second level. Through the gloom, I could make out her face as she checked her phone, probably letting Daniel know she was here. A twisted part of me wanted to charge forward right then, smash the phone out of her hand, and demand she explain herself. But I swallowed that impulse. We had a plan. Sophia and I had done reconnaissance earlier and discovered that room 210 overlooked the parking lot. For a modest bribe, the motel clerk gave us that room for the night, no questions asked. From there, we had a decent view of the corridor leading to Daniel's booked room, 212. We set up the camera in the window, waiting. Sure enough, after about 5 minutes, Olivia, wearing tight leggings and a hoodie, her yoga clothes, knocked on the door of room 212. Daniel opened it. They exchanged a lingering kiss in the hallway, then disappeared inside. My vision tunneled. I wanted to barge in immediately, but Sophia gripped my forearm. "We need proof," she whispered fiercely. For 10 agonizing minutes, we recorded the hallway. I used the directional MIC, pointed at their door. Muffled voices, the occasional laugh, then silence. It was all we needed. With the evidence secured, we decided it was time for the final act. Sophia took the lead. She strode down the corridor, leaving me a few steps behind. At exactly 8:20, she knocked on the door of 212. When there was no immediate response, she pounded harder. "Daniel." Her voice carried a lethal edge. The door opened a crack, and Daniel's bewildered face appeared. His eyes widened when he saw his wife. He tried to slam the door shut, but Sophia shouldered it open. "You lying piece of," she spat, shoving him aside. In 2 strides, she was in the middle of the motel room. I followed, my own anger propelling me forward. Olivia stood by the bed, shirt partially unzipped, her eyes wild with panic. She looked from Sophia to me, realization dawning like a thunderclap. "What are you doing here?" she stammered, her face turning chalk white. "Catching you," I snarled, "in your filthy lies." My fists clenched so hard my knuckles popped. Daniel tried to approach, stammering something about misunderstandings, but Sophia whirled on him like a fury incarnate. "You dare talk about misunderstandings," she screamed. "We have pictures, videos. We watched you walk in here with her." She shoved him back, nearly knocking him into a side table. A lamp crashed to the floor, shattering. Olivia moved toward me, possibly seeking some shred of sympathy. "It's not what it looks like." "Shut up," I roared, stepping away. "Don't you dare insult my intelligence." She flinched at the venom in my voice. Good. Let her see what her betrayal had wrought. The tension in the small room was thick with hatred. I glanced at the bed and wished I could torch the whole place. But I kept my temper on a short leash, barely. This was about humiliating them, making them admit their lies, not letting them escape with half-truths. Daniel tried a last-ditch effort to calm Sophia, grabbing her arm as she screamed obscenities at him. That was a mistake. She turned and slapped him hard across the face. He staggered back, more stunned than hurt. Olivia began to shout, tears streaming, but no one cared about her remorse. This was the moment we'd orchestrated, and no amount of crying would fix what she'd done. I saw the spark of violence in Sophia's eyes. She was done talking. So was I. Everything happened so fast it was like a slow-motion train wreck. 1 minute, we were hurling insults and threats. The next, fists were flying. I'd always considered myself a controlled man, but that night, my fury eclipsed my better judgment. Daniel tried to restrain Sophia, who was lunging at him with a rage that seemed almost superhuman. "Get off me," she shrieked, clawing at his arms. Olivia stood there, tears streaming down her face, begging us to calm down. But it only fueled my anger. How dare she ask for calm now? She'd ignited this entire explosion with her betrayal. When I saw Daniel grabbing Sophia, it triggered something primal in me. I wasn't about to let him manhandle her, cheating or not. I wasn't going to stand by while he put hands on her. I lunged forward, landing a punch right across his jaw. He stumbled, crashing into the nightstand. The cheap wood cracked under his weight, scattering an alarm clock and hotel brochures across the floor. Olivia screamed my name, trying to pull me back. I shoved her aside, still focused on Daniel. "You think you can wreck my marriage and just get away with it?" I growled through clenched teeth. He threw a wild punch in return, catching my shoulder. The pain snapped my focus but also ramped up my aggression. I tackled him, and we went crashing into a small dresser by the window. Sophia was still shouting, her voice hoarse from screaming. Olivia hovered at the edge of the brawl, yelling for us to stop, tears streaming. Somewhere in the chaos, Sophia took her rage out on Olivia. It started with insults, words like homewrecker and husband stealer hissed in a voice that seemed torn from the depths of despair. Olivia tried to defend herself, raising her arms as Sophia advanced. "I'm sorry," Olivia choked out. But that apology fell on deaf ears. Sophia shoved Olivia with both hands. Olivia stumbled back, losing her footing in that cramped motel room. She tripped over the corner of the bed, falling backward. Her head caught the edge of a small table before she hit the floor with a sickening thud. The sound was enough to snap me out of my rage. I halted mid-grapple with Daniel and turned, just in time to see Olivia's eyes roll back. For a moment, everything froze. Sophia stood there, chest heaving, her fury morphing into horror at what had just happened. Daniel struggled out from my grip, rushing to Olivia's side. I was right there too, adrenaline still pulsing but fear spiking now in tandem with my anger. Olivia lay on the floor, blood trickling from a gash on the side of her head. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes fluttering. My mind reeled. Despite my fury, I never wanted her dead. I wanted her to suffer emotionally, yes, but this was a line crossed even I had to admit. I grabbed my phone to call 911, hands shaking. The operator's voice came through calm and professional, but mine was anything but. "We need an ambulance," I rasped. "The Pinecrest Inn on Oakwood and 5th, room 212. Head injury. Hurry." Daniel pressed a handkerchief to Olivia's wound, trying to staunch the bleeding. Sophia stood in the corner, shaking, tears of her own streaming down her cheeks. No one spoke. The reality of what we'd done weighed heavily in the stale motel air. My wife lay unconscious on the floor, her deception overshadowed by the sudden threat to her life. Within minutes, sirens wailed outside. Paramedics burst into the room, pushing us aside to reach Olivia. They loaded her onto a stretcher, hooking her up to oxygen and checking her vital signs. My heart pounded as I watched. A million thoughts crashed through my head. Was I responsible for this? Would she die? Even if she survived, what would become of us? The police arrived next, drawn by the call. Their questions came rapid fire. Who's injured? What happened? Were there any weapons involved? I saw the suspicious glare in their eyes as they scanned the wrecked motel room, toppled furniture, shattered lamp, blood on the floor. It looked like a domestic war zone. I found myself spitting out some half-coherent story about an argument turned physical. Daniel and Sophia did the same, each trying to downplay their role in the altercation. But the officers weren't fools. They separated us, took statements, glancing at the battered furniture and the blood. They'd heard 1,000 versions of this scenario before: affairs, violence, regret. It was all too common. In the end, they let the paramedics rush Olivia to the hospital, with Daniel riding along. Sophia and I were left behind with the cops, each giving a statement. I was still shaking, the weight of it all sinking in. My wife might be dying, and here I was, caught in a swirl of guilt and betrayal. The anger was still there, strong, primal, but now it was mixed with something more complicated: fear, regret, maybe even a twisted sort of concern. She had betrayed me, yes. I was furious, yes. But I hadn't wanted it to end like this, with her blood on the carpet of some seedy motel. As the paramedic sirens faded into the distance, I realized there would be consequences for all of us, consequences none of us could run from anymore. I arrived at the hospital a few hours later, escorted by an officer who insisted I finish my statement first. The drive there felt surreal, as if I were floating outside my own body. My phone buzzed repeatedly, calls from Olivia's parents, from co-workers who'd heard some version of the story, from people I hadn't spoken to in months. I ignored them all. My focus was on the ICU, where I'd been told Olivia was undergoing tests to determine the extent of her head injury. The corridors of the hospital were bathed in fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic thick in the air. Everything felt jarringly normal compared to the chaos of the motel room. When I found Olivia's room, I paused at the door. Through the window, I saw her lying in bed, tubes and monitors attached, a bandage around her head. Daniel sat by her side, his face buried in his hands. A surge of anger shot through me. How dare he be in there, acting concerned, as if he hadn't helped cause this? Part of me wanted to storm in and drag him out by the collar, but I held back, taking a deep breath. Maybe I was just too exhausted to fight again. Eventually, a nurse guided me inside. Daniel looked up, eyes red, but didn't say a word. He simply nodded in acknowledgement, then slipped out of the room. I stood by Olivia's bed, staring down at the woman I once thought would be my partner for life. Her eyelids fluttered open, and for a second, She looked at me like she wasn't sure who I was. Then recognition dawned, and tears welled in her eyes. "Ethan," she rasped, her voice faint. I swallowed hard. I wasn't sure what to feel: pity, anger, betrayal, regret. "Olivia," I said, my voice rough. "How are you?" She tried to smile but winced. "I have a concussion," she said, each word coming out slowly. "The doctor says I'll be okay, eventually." A strained silence filled the space between us. My mind flashed with images of her and Daniel, arms around each other in that motel hallway. The taste of betrayal was fresh in my mouth. Yet here she was, helpless in a hospital bed, and I couldn't bring myself to unleash the fury I'd been harboring. "Why?" I finally asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and pain. "Why did you do it?" Her eyes spilled over with tears. I don't know," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It started out so innocently, just talking, feeling like someone understood me. Then it got out of control." My jaw clenched. "Understood you? Did you ever stop to think what it would do to me?" She sobbed, a raw, painful sound. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I didn't mean for this to happen." I wanted to scream at her, call her every name in the book, but the sight of her hooked up to Fours dampened my anger. She looked broken, physically and emotionally. Maybe this was her punishment, or maybe it was just a terrible outcome for everyone involved. The police arrived soon after, wanting an official statement from Olivia. They questioned her gently, mindful of her fragile state. She explained the confrontation in halting phrases, glancing nervously at me. I stood in the corner, arms folded, adding bits of clarification where needed. The question of charges loomed in the air. Would Sophia be arrested for assault? Would I? The cop seemed uncertain, leaving the door open for further investigation. Over the next 2 days, Olivia stabilized. She'd have lingering headaches and likely some therapy to help with post-concussion symptoms. Daniel visited once more, but I made it clear he wasn't welcome. Sophia didn't show up at all. The entire fiasco had left its mark on all of us: 2 broken marriages, a potential assault case, and wounds that went far deeper than Olivia's head injury. During a quiet moment on the 3rd day, Olivia reached for my hand. "Do we have a chance?" she asked, her voice quavering. I looked at her, thinking of the years we'd shared, the home we built, the dreams we once had. Then I remembered the motel, her lies, the shame and anger that still boiled beneath my skin. "I don't know," I said bluntly. "I won't lie to you, Olivia. This changes everything. I'm not sure if I can forgive or forget." She nodded, tears glinting in her eyes. I didn't comfort her. I was too consumed with my own turmoil. Even if we didn't press charges against each other, the moral and emotional toll couldn't be undone. The night she got hurt was a literal manifestation of how violently our marriage had fallen apart. As she recovered, I stepped out of the room, letting her rest. I had phone calls to make, lawyers to consult, insurance to file for the hospital bills, and a long conversation with my own conscience. Walking down the sterile corridors, I couldn't help but feel that the person I was a few days ago had ceased to exist. I'd been replaced by a vengeful, brutal version of myself that I barely recognized. In the end, the question lingered: was this the final chapter of our marriage, or a twisted new beginning? I wasn't sure. But I did know one thing: trust, once shattered, leaves scars that can't simply be bandaged up like a head wound. For Olivia and me, for Daniel and Sophia, there might be no going back. We'd have to live with what we'd done and accept the consequences of our actions, whatever they might be. And so, I walked away from her hospital room, feeling neither triumph nor satisfaction, only a deep, hollow ache where love used to be.